Hi everybody, my name's Darren Jessup, and you're invited to join me as I ask the question, what is the mission of the church? In class, we studied three different authors, David Platt, John Piper, and Christopher Wright, and my paper is based primarily on their writings. What I did initially is I read all three books, got out of them what I could. Each author brings up a lot of points and a lot of different things, but really what I want to do for this presentation and for my paper is look at the points each author brings up and then think about their points critically. Discuss why I think the way I do and point out my own thesis, which is based on their three books, and that thesis is the mission of the church is to bring others to love God. The first author we'll look at is David Platt's book, Radical, Taking Back Your Faith from the American Dream. And what I thought of his book is I thought he was, just as the book is described, is very, very radical. One of the things that I don't think that he really puts into consideration is by doing too much. If the church thinks that its mission is to go out and make people's lives better, you can actually be hurting them. Industries have been torn apart because one example I've got is from last term is people started sending old clothing to Africa, and that in turn shut down the textiles industries. For the most part, I like Platt, I like the way he wrote the book, and I agree with a lot of his points, but I don't think he's quite cautious enough. I don't think he's very well thought out in the idea that he's going to call the church back to doing more missions, doing more, giving more, and thinking of the ramifications of what that's going to do to the culture that is getting the mission. Now, what I think Platt does in a lot of his book is I think he really comes down hard on the Free West, and what I mean by Free West is America and Europe, where Christianity originated and started sending out missionaries to other parts of the world. The only problem is now in the Free West is not everybody's Christian. The Free West has freedom of religion in almost every country, and you can be any religion in any of these, which means not everybody's Christian. Another place that I think he kind of goes wrong is he wants us to put a lot of resources and give a lot of money and time and things like that to missions, but depending on how we define that missional program, like I said in the last slide, if we think that our goal is to make their lives better, or if we think that bringing them to God is going to make their lives better, then we really have a problem, because like I said, we'd be putting resources in a black hole. You'll see this come out a little bit later. I'll bring up some statistics, but right now I think in the West we have our own set of problems. And that problem is, in the West, we have a lot of atheism, agnosticism, other religious worldviews, and I think he comes down way too hard and doesn't consider those challenges that we have here today. Now, what I think Platt's thesis is it's soul saving. The church is doing little to nothing to save souls, and here's some quotes to back myself up. And the ultimate thing is, and what really kind of offended me is he really sees the American Christian church as a luxury liner, and it should be a troop ship. And when I first read that, I thought, that's kind of offensive to the Western American church. We've done a lot to support missions and to get people out in the past, but like I said, it's kind of a different world today. Now, while the West faces these challenges, there is a lot of work to do. One of the things that I think he would agree with me on is there isn't enough research done overall for every country, for every group. Yeah, there was some unity movements in the past, but really, what do people need in a target area? I think there needs to be a lot more research of that, and I would suggest that before a church gets started in looking at missionary or mission as a goal, they really do their homework, find out who needs what, and who is best suited to do that. It may not be your church, it may be a different church, or you may have to partner with a different church in order to really make some goals and make something achievable. And again, here I think he's trying to drive us into something that we may not be ready for. He's getting people really fired up, and he really does that well. But without really thinking it through, like I said, it may be disastrous or bad. Now with Platt, on the other hand, Platt's book, Let the Nations Be Glad, the Supremacy of God in Missions, he comes right out with his thesis. Mission is not the ultimate goal of the church, worship is. Mission exists because worship doesn't. Worship is ultimate, not missions, because God is ultimate, not man. I liked that statement, and it really started making me to think, okay, if we start reducing what people think the mission of the church is there something common? Is there something there that they would all agree on? And it started me in this process. Unfortunately, for what I think Piper's book is, it leads to works righteousness. Let's face it, worship is a lot of work. When you look back at the Bible, there's always all kinds of work. Build a temple, build this, do that, make singers, psalms, poetry, build an altar. That's all work that leads up to worship. So to me, trying to say that the ultimate goal of the church is worship is really like saying the same thing that they said in the Reformation. So while I like his statement, and it does start me on a process, I disagree with it overall. Now here again too, we have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has given over $100 million for AIDS and Ebola in Africa. And that's just Africa, and it hasn't even put a dent in it. If the church's goal is worship, and we have to start making people better to make them worship by curing their diseases, fixing their societies and things like that, there we lead into works again. And here we go, we're back into this black hole syndrome again, where we're going to be pushing a bunch of money, a bunch of resources, and a ton of people into a situation that isn't really good. There's got to be a better way to handle this. Now this slide, you guys may not like this because I do bring up Karl Marx. Karl Marx, yeah, he leads to communism, and that really leads to some really bad things. But when you get back into his philosophy, he really is talking about labor and alienation. And you can take those two philosophies of his and really apply them to work. His big thing was, we're alienated from the fruits of our labor because we can't afford to do it. We're making always something for someone else. And I just wanted to bring up those ideas of his to drive that point home. Worship can be viewed as work, and it doesn't lead to righteousness. Some faiths may think that, but the Protestants revolted against it. Now, in thinking about Karl Marx and labor and alienation, it brings up another good question that I have. If you look at missionaries in the past, they don't have the same context that we do today. In the last 40 or 50 years, technology has just taken off. We can video conference inmates in the South Dakota State Prison to the courthouse so that they never have to leave the prison. That's a landmark. I mean, that saved us so much time and money and effort to be able to do that. And the world is just getting smaller with technology. Can we do better missions remotely by using electronics and do it more effectively and do it better? I think the answer is yes, and I really think somebody needs to try this. Would it be better just to give someone internet access and access to people's remotely through video conferencing, video chatting? With that, we can actually set up probably more resources and more targeted resources using technology today and take less risks. There shouldn't have to be those risks today. I mean, we've tried to make everything so safe. By putting people in bad situations, there's risks involved. With technology, we can reduce those risks. It doesn't have to be risky. I think it just has to be better. Now, I don't know about the rest of the class, but I really like the Christopher Wright book, The Mission of God's People, A Biblical Theology of God's People. Now, his thesis, just like Piper, comes right out in the front. He's going to take a hermeneutic approach to the question and go back to the Bible. Fantastic. This is just great for Christians. And he tells you right in the introduction or in the first chapter that he wants it to be a journey of discovery for us. He's not going to give us an overarching thesis, I don't think. I think what he wants to do is he wants to bring up all kinds of possibilities. And in those possibilities, he wants us to spin it off. Best way to say this is he's going to lay a foundation and we get to build on it. You can't beat that. It's a great way to learn. And he really asks some hard questions right off the bat that are listed here on this slide. Now, I really love this statement coming out of the Wright book. The church is made for God's mission, not the other way around. In other words, the mission is God's, we take part in it. Too many times when you look at missions, people want to jump in and take charge and we should do this and we should do that, and they're right. There is some planning that needs to be done, and there really needs to be some thinking that needs to be done, but we always have to remember the mission is God's, it's not ours. So therefore, in his hermeneutic approach, I think he's right on. Let's go back to the Bible, get down to it, and really see how we can take part in this. And this really goes back to Piper, too, because if it's really God's mission, then God really is in charge and not us. I mean, God is ultimate, not man. So we have to remember that when we take part in these missions. Now, Wright seems to agree with Platt, and he brings this up. It's the same point as Platt. It's soul saving again. And from Revelation 24, I quoted here, there will be a judgment, and everyone will be judged. Death and hell are thrown into the lake of fire, into a second death. Along with those that are not found in the book of life are thrown there as well. And to me, what that means, and I've heard it interpreted this way, is if we don't reach these people, this is their damnation. They'll be actually thrown into the lake of fire along with hell and everything else, while the rest of us are saved. Augustine wrestles with this, and whether you're an annihilationist or not, Augustine wrestles with it really well in the City of God on whether it's annihilation or not, because there seems to be two schools of thought. Annihilation on one side, and on the other one, eternal damnation or eternal torment. Either way, it's not a good end. So he seems to agree with Platt that we need to get out there and save as many souls, and it's absolutely imperative that we get out there and do that. Now, my criticisms for Wright is he seems to agree a lot with Platt and Piper, and he even quotes Piper a lot. And Platt seems to focus on soul saving, and Wright seems to follow him. The emphasis on worship is big. He seems to take that from Piper, and it's important, but there's so many different points that he brings up that really the love of God kind of gets lost in some of those points. It's kind of like a forest. It's not really that hard to read, but it's almost like you want to keep a scorecard. Okay, what is he saying here? What is he saying over there? Look at all these points. How do they correlate? But like I said, going through this process, it really makes me come up with my own theory, and I really think that's what he wanted us to do. Now this all brings me up to my own thesis on going through all of this in this class and trying to really boil and reduce everything down to something common, and that's my thesis that we are called to bring others to love God. If we're trying to bring people together for worship, it leads to works. I got into that earlier. But I like what Wright says here, that faith comes first and then works comes from that faith. And that really is the Protestant ideal. What I do is I take that one step further and I say when we love God, it isn't work. So from that love for God, then we're able to work. And it really isn't work. It's going to be something that we enjoy. It's not going to be seen as that. Which really brings me up to a problem that I ran into. And it's It's will faith be eternal? That's a really good question. When we're all there in the presence of God, will we still need faith? My first bet is not. Now, this isn't panned out, this isn't research, but it is a really good question. Will we still need faith in the presence of God? I think we're going to worship, but I don't know that faith is going to be required anymore. I took Wright's hermeneutic approach, jumped into a concordance, and looked for love. And I think it was like 3 pages of love quotes. And out of those, I picked out the 50 that I thought were the most important, that showed love of God coming first, and there was like 50 of them. Here are just a sampling of some of them that I thought were the most important, and one that keeps coming up in the NIV is the covenant of love between his people and God. So it's a love relationship that God has for us and we have for God. And I really used that to drive my own thesis home. 50 passages is really kind of hard to ignore. Now, my last thoughts on my own thesis here, that we are called to bring others to love God, is it satisfies the soul-saving thing that the other authors really like to get into. And if we do bring others to love God, they will be saved. John 3:16 really sums it up well. God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son to save us. But if you really want to understand it, you've got to be almost 50 years old and you have to have teenagers. I don't know about the rest of you. I think some of you guys are pretty young. But love and work, that dynamic between them, is like raising teenagers. You love them. You want to see them succeed. You want to see them do well. But it's frustrating. They are so much work because they stop listening to you. And I really think that's what God feels about us sometimes. It's like hurting teenagers or trying to get teenagers to do something that they really don't want to do. You love them, you want to see them succeed, and that love is always there. It never goes away, so it's never really work. You're always seeing the success of it. Now, this is just a summary of some of the points that I made. My paper was 20 plus pages long, so I really didn't draw this out too much. If you're curious about my points, get a hold of me. I'll send you a copy of my paper if you really want to look at it. But in summary, I mean, we lived in a technologically advanced culture. Our culture, it doesn't have the same context as our forefathers do, and we're kind of blazing our own new cultural context today. Nowhere else in history has technology grown so fast. So can we use technology to do it better? I think we can. Now, all the authors go into details of sacrifice and the West kind of ignoring missions, and we run into that same problem. Not everybody in the West is Christian. You can't blame the entire culture or their context based on what you think that we should be doing for the third world or for bringing people to God. There's a big problem in your stereotyping when you do that. Now, I did want to bring out again that Bill and Melinda Gates, over $100 million just to Africa. And so far it hasn't made a huge impact in the problem there. Ebola still pops up. They still have huge aid problems. And that $100 million is gone. I mean, can we do better? Yeah, I think we can, but I don't think throwing money at it, as Platt said in the beginning of his book, is the solution. I think building relationships with these people and slowly getting them to change is going to be the best solution overall, and it's going to be really hard. But I think we can do it. I think we have time on our side, and not only that, we have God on our side. So from that, let's get going. Now in this, I just wanted to mention one last time how influential the Wright book was for me. I mean, no overarching thesis. Here's a bunch of points. Go in and think for yourself. I really love that approach. And I really think he's challenging us to go up to that next level. Where do we go from here? We have to start thinking critically in order to do it. There are better things that we can do. We can do it smarter, and we really do need to bring people in to love God. I mean, that is the whole point of mission. I mean, if you take everything and boil it down, reduce it back, everybody would agree. Everybody needs to love God. Everybody needs to come to God. And now, in that knowing of God and loving of God, you're going to be saved. And through that, our missions are done. The thing is everything else we need to figure out how it fits. Overall, bring people to love God, and everything should kind of fall together.